All right. Hello, everybody. We are back after a couple of weeks off. Took a little break and gonna have another conversation for the Free Will Project. My friend Roy is back. I don't know if you caught his previous conversation, but if you haven't, you should because he's a clever guy. That's why he's here. Roy, say hello. Maybe give us a little intro for the people that aren't familiar with you yet.
Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Roy. I'm a psychology student in the Netherlands, and I got into the topic of free will a few years ago, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So,
I like it. I like it. All right. So we have a lot of things to talk about today, and I don't know how much of it we'll get to, but we'll see what happens. The main thing that we wanted to discuss was Susan Blackmore, who is a psychologist, a researcher of all sorts of different things, and just kind of a fantastic resource for this conversation. Very accessible, very charismatic, just kind of a charming person. But yeah, maybe if you could give us a little background on what you know about Susan.
yeah, for sure. She was actually the one who got me into the free will thing in the first place. I didn't even know that free will was a debate. I didn't know people discussed this. I just thought I overthought things in the beginning, basically, and that's what people told me. Oh, you're overthinking it. So I let it go, really. And then actually, years later, I found this Susan Blackmore video talking about free will, the self, and consciousness. And she described her subjective experience much in a similar way to how I would describe it. So it seems as if there's something similar there that I recognized early on a lot of other people didn't have. Um, and then I heard that free will was one of the biggest debates in all of philosophy, and that it was a big thing in neuroscience right now. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not crazy, or at least not for this reason. But that's how I got into it. And Susan Blackmore is actually sort of she became sort of a hero of skepticism, because in the beginning she studied parapsychology for many, many years, because she was actually convinced that the paranormal existed, and she was driven to prove to everyone that there were paranormal phenomena. And she spent a lot of time um, trying to find good evidence for it, and never found anything. And after many, I would say, almost 30 years or something.
Yeah, it was
uh,
decades of like
yes,
pursuit on this. She wasn't messing around. Like,
yes. And then eventually she changed her mind. She had just this insight, oh, what if it's all just not there? And from that moment on, she basically became a skeptic. And she has done much work in psychology. Um, she done some early work on the visual system and change blindness. Um, she wrote a few fantastic books. She wrote the textbook for consciousness, um, from the Stanford University Press, which is just a great overview of the entire field of consciousness studies, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the science, in the neuroscience, but also in the philosophy, and if you want a good overview of the topic of consciousness in an academic setting. Then Consciousness: A Short Introduction by Susan Blackmore is perfect for that.
I definitely need to get a hold of that. That sounds great. So to dive in a little bit to her story, I've heard her give a talk about her sort of subjective experiences that led her into the parapsychology, and she described in like a literal out of body experience that she had when I think she was in college at the time, and just um, the way that you can have those kind of subjective experiences that are just undeniably like out of the ordinary And
Right.
a lot of times our cultures don't have a way for us to process that outside of, supernatural explanations.
Absolutely.
um, a lot of the skeptic community would be like hesitant to talk about things like that, and so that's one of the real like bits of value I think she brings to the conversation is she has the psychological and the physiological background to kind of connect the dots on these things, and she's spent so much time um, understanding and giving respect to that subjective experience that is real in a sense, but maybe not in the way that people interpret it. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that's just I think that's something we need more of. I think it's one of those things that I'm so fascinated by the varieties of subjective experience we can have. Um,
Absolutely. And these are clearly experiences someone can have. And you can have them in lucid dreams, you can have them on psychedelic drugs, you can have them through meditation. Um, these are real experiences. It's just that and I also have to cushion it in when I talk about it. Like, hey, remember, I'm talking about subjective experience now, and I'm not talking about the ontological nature of it. I'm not making any claims of any metaphysical.
right.
I'm just reporting an experience when I'm talking about that. So yeah, we have to keep those separated. And these transformative experiences, they have a tendency to sort of give you what you really want. So if you go into an experience wanting something to be the case, and you get into this elevated state, it will probably give you something which you can attach that thing onto. So yeah, I think we should talk more about it,
Yeah,
about experiences, because then it normalizes it. Because I've had many of these experiences myself, and there's clearly sort of a spectrum of people who get more of these experiences and people who get less of these experiences. Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
oh, go
uh,
ahead.
yeah, the last thing I wanted to say is that now a lot of Susan Blackmore's work goes into explaining out of body experiences and near death experiences scientifically. And within the last 10 years, lots of research has come out in this area. So yeah, it's a really interesting time also to see, just to see this research come out.
Yeah, a lot of it. Uh, well, I was just skimming her Wikipedia page to kind of prime my memory before we hopped on here, and
Right.
one of the citations stated that a lot of this can boil down to like sleep paralysis or other sort of biological phenomenon that we understand, but we haven't necessarily connected it to like the cultural relevance that it might have, or like you were saying, you kind of get what you expect to get out of these experiences, and we see like
Right.
similar things happen across cultures, but it always happens within that cultural context. So
Yeah.
so that
It
it's
also it
oh, go
also
ahead.
makes you think about other things, like when little kids come up to running to their parents because there's like a monster under their bed. They might have actually seen one, you know. Like, it might just have been a form of sleep paralysis, or and just what you said, sleep paralysis is a very good example, because you wake up, you can't move, right? And your brain is just going to go straight into survival mode. It's like, oh, I can't move, oh, something must prevent me from moving, and you get this very terrifying experience. But I know people who do lucid dreaming very frequently, and they invoke sleep paralysis for fun, because because they can interject themselves into a
Oh,
lucid dream
right,
uh,
yeah, no,
from there. So yeah.
my significant other, sometimes she suffers from sleep paralysis, and whenever she hears things like that, she's like, why would anyone do that on purpose? But a lot of people do things on purpose that I would never. Like, a lot of people are jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Right.
Like, why would you do that? I don't know. Some people find it fun. A lot of people wouldn't. So I guess that's
Right.
how that breaks down.
Yeah, but acknowledging these experiences is important because, the mystery about these experiences tend to go away the more you talk about them. Also, if you have a person who is an all-out believer that this is another reality that they're going to, if you ask them, well, well, what did it really look like? Did it really look like the same thing, or was it a little bit different? And you will get inaccuracies that point to it not being an other reality, but
Right,
something in your head.
right. That's the part that really I find really fascinating is the way Susan can draw these connections between our physiological structure and the actual like subjective experience of some of these things. Like you mentioned the visual system, and I remember in one of her lectures she was talking about the common experience, of various hallucinations. You have this common experience of like traveling through a tunnel of some sort, and
Yeah.
she actually connected that to the structure of the visual system itself, that like you're not receiving inputs, and so the system itself's like reflecting its own structure and trying to generate some kind of activity to feed into what you're expecting, and that ends
Right.
up looking like a tunnel. And
Yeah.
that just blows my mind that um, so many of
Yeah.
these deep subjective experiences are probably telling us about our own body in some way. Maybe it's maybe we have to like interpret it symbolically, or maybe we have to do a lot of work and connect it to the actual like physiological system in some way, like Susan has. But that's wild to me that we can even like that we're even smart enough to make these connections.
Right. And don't you sort of see a white light if you press on your eyeballs very softly?
Right,
It's like
yeah, I've
it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be a visual stimulus. If you just press your eyeball, neurons will get triggered, and there you go. You see light.
yeah,
uh,
I think I've heard of like Isaac Newton and like other people like really being like fascinated with that phenomenon. That
really?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Uh, Isaac Newton was into all kinds of weird stuff, but
I did
yeah,
know that.
I've read somewhere. I mean, I'm probably wrong. I'm wrong about everything, but but I've read somewhere that he would do that as like a type of practice to I don't know, kind of explore his own self and stuff like that. So it's
Interesting.
yeah, it's fascinating to have a body, to be a body,
Yeah.
and it has all kinds of tricks like that, just waiting for you to figure them out.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So that when we were talking about connections between the subjective and the physiological,
Right.
that visual system thing came to mind. Are
Right.
there other connections like that you can think of? Or I'm trying right now, and I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Right. Like connections in what way?
Like the connection between a sort of strange subjective experience and the sort of objective like understanding that we have, kind of like sleep
Right.
paralysis leads to the hallucinations and whatnot.
Right. Um, well, for one thing, um, I think the first time I did psychedelics was perhaps the first time I knew that consciousness or your subjective experience could be radically different
Right,
in such a fundamental way. It was just mind blowing. And to me, that experience is the valuable thing. I don't have to then abstract away from that experience and go, well, what does it all mean in some ultimate ontological sense? Um, I'm not drawing any conclusions um, about any metaphysical claims about reality,
right.
but I can talk about the experience I had without claiming that it's touching some ultimate reality that we tap into if we do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Uh,
I feel like there's I can't think of it in the moment, but I feel like there's a term for this. Maybe it's like naive realism or something like that. But I feel like a lot of people, if they don't have some kind of strange experience like that, or if they've never really kind of been shook out of their like fixed relationship with the
right,
objective world, it's hard to even think about like what that would mean. Or whenever people are, you know, making descriptions of those types of experience, it's hard to not just hear it as nonsense, like that's just not the way things work. And it's like, well, I
right,
mean, it works for some people some of the time like that, you know. It's everyone's having these like, you know, unique novel experiences of the universe, and some of them
right,
are like quite outside the you know, the norms of our cultural experience.
right. And I think that's perhaps like, I don't know, Sam Harris called it a cultural blind spot once, that things like introspection um, is something that I find is just sometimes difficult to talk about. I keep having to mention to people, I am talking about just subjective experience now, right?
Right,
So I'm not talking about how the world is, I'm talking about how it seems, right? And people would say, well, yeah, but that's just all subjective, so why even talk about it? But, you know, there is the people who say that turned inward for 5 minutes, saw nothing of interest, and just went back, you know, and, you know, I just think it's just like, give it a good hard try, right? Because,
right,
for an example, the visual field we all have, right? It feels instantly like you just look at an area and instantly I can just take in my whole room in full color, shape, and form. And we just know that that's not true. There's like
yeah,
different pathways in the brain doing all sorts of things. And here's a little bit of, you know, shade is detected, or a little bit of motion is detected. And this visual field is formed and it looks perfect. But we all know now that we have optic blind spots, for example, which you can easily find if you just, you know, block one eye and move your thumb to the left, and there, it's gone. It's gone. And but people forget. People think, oh, that's just a fun trick. But most people that ever lived out their entire lives on Earth in history lived out their lives without realizing the optic blind spot was a thing. So
right.
it's impossible for the entire Earth's population to be monumentally wrong about something everyone is staring at continuously, right?
Right. Well, and it's just like you mentioned, people like, you know, dismissing, oh, well, that's just subjective or something. And it's like, well, everything you've ever experienced, like everything, you know, you took in through a subjective route, right? Like
Exactly.
you
Like
can't help.
I'm not saying there's no value in you know, experimentation and verifying, and I'm not saying my subjective experience points to any ultimate reality. But what I am saying is, you, this is sort of, you're sort of forced to being interested in this because it's always there. It's always sort of this weird thing that you don't even see colors in your peripheral vision. Your brain
Right,
just fills that in, and then your visual field is sort of this weird egg-shaped thing, right?
right.
And it has edges, but they're sort of not clearly defined, right? Two eyes, one visual field. No one has a problem with this. There's all this, you know what I mean? Like,
At
it's
some point,
weird.
at some point, you have to get a little curious about it.
At some point, you have to go like, okay, but what does the wet meat in my brain? How does it transfer electromechanical impulses into the taste of coffee and, like, you know, this the world, you know? And that's what Susan Blackmore is very good at pointing out, is that there really is an interesting problem here, and the minute you see it, then you're obligated to sort of pull your hair out and be fascinated by it, because you are it. You're, you know, you're looking at the thing that is looking out of a telescope. You're looking at the thing looking. It, it's
Right.
it's weird and interesting.
Yeah. No. No, there's something I want to explore for a minute that I can't remember if we've talked about before.
Right,
But I I have a hard time appreciating the big discussion about this hard problem of consciousness,
right,
where people are like mystified by the link between the subjective and the objective, and like
right,
uh, to me, I feel like a lot of those links have actually been connected, and I feel like, of course, there's like a ton of work to do, right? Like I'm not saying like this is entirely resolved, but I certainly don't experience it as a problem in the way uh, some other people just seem to be like absolutely mystified, and they seem to insist that there's really like uh, there's really no understanding it at this point, and I feel like we've at least got some good footholds to kind of, I don't know, to at least like resolve it on like the personal level. Like I understand there's no like perfect scientific description of the situation, but I mean there never really is for anything.
right.
And yeah, I don't know. I wanted to kind of get your feelings on that. It's like, what do you think of the hard problem of consciousness, and how hard is it?
So I'm with you and I'm not with you, right?
I like it.
It's like, yeah, right. Especially the last few decades, neuroscience is finally, getting out of its toddler shoes, getting really interesting, and but it just got started, right? So we have to.
Right.
My optimistic side is like, guys, give neuroscience a chance, right? Let's not just push it away right now. They're doing a lot of useful stuff, like, and what you're saying, the correlates of consciousness, like the neural correlations we can find, the things that happen in the brain that accompany a particular experience or doing. That's very interesting, and we're getting better at that. And the technology to measure it gets better. And yeah, we know so much more about the brain now. I think if you would pull William James back to right here to 2020 and you told him everything we knew about the brain, it would be amazing. Right? So we discovered so much, but then again, you know I think there's something to say for those people who say, yo, this is something else though. This is a really, really hard problem. Like, I don't have a position on consciousness because I don't have enough to really take a strong position.
Yeah.
But and I have to admit that even on the hard problem, I'm not prepared to say that there isn't a problem at all. What some people also do is they say there is no hard problem of consciousness. You know,
When I'm feeling spicy, I'll go in that direction. I'll call it like the non-problem or something like that.
right,
But
right,
I mean,
right.
I don't know. I'm
You
just
know,
some dummy on the internet, so who cares about what I say?
now, but I think it's a legitimate concern. I just don't know where I stand on this. I don't know. It's like, personally, I don't think consciousness is something extra that gets added to the mix as a new component. Um, I don't think it's something magical that,
Right.
I don't think it's that direction. But then again, if someone tomorrow said, Chet, I cracked it. I know how the brain produces consciousness. I know exactly how it's done. What do you what do you expect him to show you? Like, do you expect to see brain scans or a theory, or do you expect, certainly, feel like him when you're reading it, or like, like what do you expect? What do you
Um.
expect to tell you? Like, so there's the brain.
Yeah.
Which is like 99 billion dead things, right? Or like unconscious things. And how does it go from just electrical signals to neurons
Right.
to an experience?
I
Or at least it seems like there's an experience. It's just
yeah.
like,
Yeah, I'm not skeptical about the experience part. I think the conversation around what you call embodied consciousness is like very instructive. That like you're not just limiting it to like the brain or the nervous system and the brain, but like the experience of these systems inside of a body, inside of an environment. Like you
Right.
connect all these things. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think so much of what we think we're talking about when we're talking about consciousness is linguistic.
Yeah.
So I think there's this sort of level of the discussion where you're talking about an experience that like we share with other similar animals, other primates and other mammals and whatnot. I think there's a level of experience we all share. And then I think when you add language on top of that and like really complex systems of communication, I think you get like a whole another layer of experience on that. But yeah, I'm with you. Like at the end of the day, I don't expect for consciousness to be a thing. I expect it to be like a product of all these systems interacting.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Susan Blackmore's view, under her view, she would say consciousness is an illusion, but not saying it doesn't exist, but that it's not what it seems to be.
right.
Basically that we just all have these wrong ideas about consciousness to begin with, and that's why we phrase our questions wrong. That's kind of what she is saying. But then also she claims a high level of agnosticism when it comes to consciousness. Um, and yeah, that's also where I am a little bit. Like, to be honest, I don't even know um, if the heart problem is as hard as David Chalmers says it is, but I won't 100% close that door yet either. And here's my weirdness. It's like, on one hand, I feel like, okay, yeah, we could explain consciousness in physical mechanisms, and but then there's also a part of me who just goes, maybe we never figure it out. Maybe our brains are just not complex enough to figure themselves out. That's also entirely possible in my mind.
Yeah, I buy the narrative that we're definitely like on the path to figuring that out, but yeah, I don't know, like who can really say? Who can really say what's going to happen? So I
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think your hesitation is probably wise. Probably smarter than some of the things I say.
No, well, it's, I don't know. I've been all over the place. Like, if you want to talk about isms, I've been, been a consciousness illusionist on Monday and a Mysterianist on Tuesday, where, I don't know. It's,
Which
consciousness is a really, really hard one for me.
but hey, that totally fits with Susan Blackmore's discussion of the self, where
Right.
she kind of talks about the self is like not a singular thing, but like you're kind of a series of selves. Like in any given moment, you're almost like a different self. So it's
Right.
like I don't know. Do you really are we just like fundamentally mistaken in expecting ourselves to be consistent with these discussions? Like maybe we should allow ourselves like room to be different selves and to have different like conflicting intuitions that maybe
Right.
get resolved at a later time.
Absolutely.
I certainly think I've seen uh, people talk about the law of non-contradiction when it comes to logic and thinking and stuff like that, and I've seen people definitely go like too hard with that they'll never allow themselves like a contradictory thought, and I feel like that really prevents you from exploring a lot of ideas as deep as you can and as honestly as you can,
Yeah.
because life is contradictory. Like I feel like you can just allow yourself a little bit of space to be a different person every now and then, and I don't see the
Sure. Yeah.
problem there.
Oh, sure. No, it's also about just, I mean, you can also change, and you can also, hypothesize every way which you want, it's, that's all good. But yeah, when it comes to the self, I am in much more strong agreement with Susan Blackmore. I don't know enough about consciousness yet, but on the self bit, I can say that I think what she says makes a lot of sense, at least to me. she basically says that the self is pretty much as much an illusion as free will is an illusion. And she also links them together in the sense that, you know, if there's no self, then there's no self to have the free will. So by default, free will must also be an illusion.
Yeah, a lot of these skepticisms will allow you to just kind of cut right under like the big
Right,
discussion of free will, where you're like, oh wait, that concept was built on all these other concepts.
right,
It clearly can't be what I thought it was if
right,
this other foundational stuff isn't what I thought it was. Like it shifts
right.
the whole structure.
Yes, and when it comes to the self, sort of the shotgun case for it is just that we looked in the brain and we didn't find it. That's basically it. It could have been there, you know, right? Like there could have been a little self in there, sort of sitting in between the ears and between the eyes, and
Pulling the levers.
yeah,
the,
and having the experience, but we didn't find that. We
the
found
the homunculus.
yeah, right, and we didn't find that. We just found a brain doing a whole bunch of stuff at the same time, at you know at different moments. You know, it's just the brain, man. There's just no guy. Yeah, it's a brain doing what brains do, and this feeling of a continuous, coherent, consistent self that sort of I am the same me as I was 10 years ago, and I'm the same me as I am tomorrow. Um, there's just no place for this self to continue.
Right.
Not physiologically. All of our cells get replaced over time. Um, you know, we are probably going to have more in common than me and 2-year-old me, right? It's just that that's just how it works. We change radically, and there's just no place for the self to be. Neurons rewire.
Right. Well, and we know in a number of ways that what this is going to be kind of dualistic language, but I don't mean it to be that way. It's just some that's on once again, it comes back to like linguistics. Is I think so much of this is just built into our culture and the language we
Yeah,
speak, and so we
yeah. We say I so much
we accept
that
it uncritically.
yeah, you know, yeah, it is. You know, we never, we never question it, but you know, we never realize that everything I. That's a really bizarre thing to do. You
Right.
know,
But
it's so,
what I was gonna get at before I started like qualifying myself is
right,
myself is that the way we know that the way the brain you know takes in the raw experience of the universe and then it reports it to us in this sort of subjective experience is highly
right,
filtered. We experience almost none of what's there, and the brain's a sort of like simulation machine that gives us the simulation that's good enough to navigate our landscape, and it doesn't represent it perfectly accurately. And I guess that comes back to like the naive realism, is you know the
right.
idea
Yeah,
that that's not happening, but
right.
we know neuroscientifically it is. So
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The interesting thing is with the self is it's at least a little bit of a more potent illusion in the sense that, and it might also be a more useful illusion. I just mean the experience of complete selflessness just seems impractical at university and job interviews and you know what I mean. I mean, it seems like to have this sense of self, this sort of practical sense of self, is useful in some ways, and I also don't think every way of talking about the self is illusory. We can talk about ourselves as, you know, homo sapiens, or we can talk about ourselves as you know, a podcaster, or you know, and so on. So
I mean, some of the conversations just about like utility, right? It's not necessarily about
right,
like ontology, like you were saying. It's just about like moving through the day and having the tools to accomplish the things you need to accomplish to keep going.
right,
And you know, a lot of times that's what evolutionary patterns are about. They're about continuing. They're not necessarily about like some kind of abstract, perfect accuracy of the world. But
Exactly.
yeah, uh,
Yeah, if it works, that's enough. It doesn't have to be
right.
great. It just has to be. It just has to be good enough,
It just
right?
has to make it till tomorrow.
Yeah, and I guess if you're constantly pondering, the bundle theory of self, um, instead of just but yeah, I think that's a good thing to probably get into, to the difference between ego theory and bundle theory,
Oh, do it. Yeah,
since we're
please.
talking about the self. Just very crudely put, right? And there is going to be a philosopher who doesn't fall in any of these categories, right? But I just want to very crudely put, the ego theorist is the most extreme case of that. Is you believe the self is a consistent thing, that it exists, that it's not just a bundle of thoughts and inputs and outputs that creates this illusion of self, but the ego theorist is basically Cartesian dualism. That's basically what that is. That's the ego theorist. The bundle theorist is David Hume, who we talked about a little bit before we went live. Um, he basically said that the self is just a bundle of things. It's not one entity. It's sort of like there's all kinds of stuff in the bucket, but there's not really a bucket. It's just a bundle of impressions from the outside world coming in, how other people see you, your social place in the world, your ideas about yourself, um, all of those things together, your name, and the fact that you're looking out of the same eyes, all of those things add on to you having this experience of being this consistent entity that's sort of, you don't feel like you are your body. You feel like you own your body, like you have a body, right?
Right.
And that is what the illusion of self is, this feeling that you're riding around in your head that's just not there in reality. And if you want to make that link to, if you have, for example, in meditation, people experience this subject object distinction disappearing,
Right.
and this also happens on psychedelics often to people. um, so it is something that by injecting a particular chemical into the brain, you can just turn that off for a bit and not have this feeling of being inside your head looking out of your eyes. It is something that you can play with in various ways.
That's very fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I, I like it. I like it a lot. I feel like so much of that, um, so much of the sort of kind of implicit like dualistic experience that we have, that you have to really be skeptical of to get beyond that. And even then, like in my mind, a lot of times it's like an intellectual process. It's not like viscerally that like I understand that that I feel like I'm one with the room I'm in, that I'm one with the biosphere,
Right.
that I have to kind of like talk myself through that. Um, yeah, I feel like kind of biologically we're almost set up to like assume some kind of dualistic view of the world, but at the same time I don't want to be too like deterministic about that, because it seems like we have plenty of what you might call like monistic or non-dualistic philosophies in the world, and that has to come from somewhere. um,
Right.
a lot of those people arrived at those positions like intuitively. They didn't necessarily like you know they didn't I don't know, it wasn't the same like sort of abstract scientific process that I feel like I arrived at that thought through.
Right.
So yeah, it's on one hand I'm like tempted to assume like dualism is almost some kind of like default assumption that arises out of the way we're structured, and at the same time it's like maybe that's not not observing culture enough. Like maybe I'm buying into other influences, kind of like not observing them enough in the total calculation there. So
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I know we've talked
Well,
a little bit about non-dualism before,
right.
and first off, my intuition is always to talk about monism rather than non-dualism. But I don't. Do you have any thoughts about those two terms, and like if one makes more
Right.
sense than the other?
Yeah. Yeah. I got very interested in Buddhist philosophy and especially Zen and Dzogchen, which is more Tibetan. Zen um, is Japanese Zen, what I'm looking up the most. And non-dualism um, is central, at least to Zen. This idea of non-duality
Hmm.
is central, and there is a sort of a nuanced difference. Some people say it's not a difference at all, but it's more of a philosophical difference. It's just that monism makes an affirmative statement. It says it's one, and non-dualism makes a negative statement. It says it's not two, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, and um, for me, which is very interesting because I forgot the name who said it, but it's a famous quote. Someone said that if you have a very, very profound experience, a transformative experience, no matter if it's during psychedelics or prayer or meditation or what, if you have this sort of experience, these out of body experiences, these really, really, really out of the ordinary um, events, um, it's almost impossible not to become an ontological dualist, right?
Right.
That's what he said. But for me, the few psychedelic experiences I've had were very monist. Were very, whoa, everything is one thing somehow. Feeling, right? So to me, on me,
Right.
it had the opposite effect. Um, but yeah, I think both terms are fine. I think non-dualism is interesting. I think it's an interesting view. Um, you know, it's sort of a more of a direct answer to dualism, and it also kind of goes into dualism being sort of your starting point.
Yeah.
And there's also been some research on how early kids begin to um, differentiate between other beings and other objects. That
That's
happens very early on. I guess it was like a 2-year-old or around 2 years old. They begin to really make that um, that distinction very clearly. So it could also be a thing of us and other, a sort of, but probably what you say, language and culture, probably many things are connected to this sense of self. Um,
yeah, I had a couple of thoughts there. So I was just saying, like, I don't know, maybe we're like biologically destined to be dualists or something. And then but in thinking about, like, like you bring up childhood development, and uh that reminds me that, yeah, actually, separating ourselves from the world is actually like a stage of development. Like we're not necessarily born that way. Maybe it's part of our sort of physiological program to develop that at some point. But yeah,
I mean, it seems to me very handy that if something happens, that you know if you are doing it or if someone else is doing it too, right? So
right.
if you have sort of a crude understanding of, okay, so this is me, that I don't know, it just seems like a very useful thing to have. That's why I think we all have this illusion. But I don't think that just because the self we have is illusory, or and therefore the self doesn't have free will in the libertarian sense. um
I'm trying to think, like, what would the practical, like, subjective experience, if we didn't have that, what would that be like? Like, you're at the dinner table and you're like, pass the ketchup, and somebody's hand grabbed it and it moved towards your visual field or something. Like, I don't I don't know what that would
I
even
don't know,
be
I don't
like.
know, like
It's
what
hard
I
to
know
imagine.
what I know is if you take a good amount of LSD, then the self might go away. But if you're inside of that experience, you know perfectly well that you couldn't function like that in society. You can't be the universe and go to a business meeting or or have lunch with someone. I mean, maybe someone can. I mean, to me, it seems like a lot. It
Yeah,
seems like a lot.
you have some of those Silicon Valley types talking about like microdosing all the time. It's like I don't know,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe they're
Maybe they.
walking some kind of fine line
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I
Maybe they're right and we are wrong. There's a possibility there.
That's scary to think about. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's really fascinating though. Like, yeah, just giving it like a few seconds to simmer in my brain, I'm much more tempted to think about cultural influences on our development, kind
right.
of, because I mean, if you think about the culture, I mean, we both share some like fundamental cultural history. You know, we
Yeah,
very much come from cultures that thought of the world dualistically, that thought of like the soul as something riding around inside the body. Like you
right.
brought up Descartes, he thought like the soul was riding around in your pineal gland, I think, and like it's yeah,
Yeah,
there's all
yeah.
there's all kinds of, and I mean he was supposed to be like, you know, sort of rational enlightenment thinker, you
Yeah,
know.
well, at the time, it sort of made sense. Rene Descartes was a brilliant philosopher. He never quite specified where the soul was located,
Oh,
to my
okay.
knowledge. But yeah, the pineal gland was perhaps essential, or perhaps the sort of connection to it.
I could have
Um,
sworn, maybe I'm misremembering. I could have sworn he had a quote about it being the seat of the soul.
yeah, oh,
Um,
that's possible.
maybe I
Yeah,
took in
something
too
like that.
much. Maybe I took in too
No.
much hippie propaganda off the internet.
No, no, no. That does ring a bell. In fact, that does ring a bell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, even and I mean, these are things, you know, we obviously live in like really different contexts, but like in a deep way, like uh, these 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 cultural constructs, like they affect so much of, you know, people talk about the Western world and stuff like that. We're, you know, so deeply influenced by the assumptions of like Christianity, for example, or capitalism, or all
yeah.
these
Or
other
also,
social organizational models. And
yeah,
it's really hard to like to question those things, to really dig in there. And yeah, it definitely, maybe it's too much of a generalization to say like uh, the West seems to trend towards more of a dualistic way of looking at the world, and the East may be more monistic or non-dualistic.
yeah. No, I could definitely say that. Like, there are some Buddhist schools, some Zen schools that are dualist, but they're like exceptions to the rule, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's interesting that seems to be the case. Yeah, I guess David Hume is an example of someone who, a lot of the things Hume says are very compatible with what the Buddha allegedly has said.
Hmm.
So it depends on who you look up. Um, these ideas have been everywhere basically, but it's just about where they become popular and where they don't.
Right. Which makes you
Um,
wonder, like, what are the reasons for that? Like, is there something like geographic, or is it
I
just like
think
an
it's
accident
heavy.
of history, or
I
like I
think
don't
it's
know.
heavily cultural. It's heavily cultural. Like, for an example, if you look at the United States, there is a lot of the American dream, for example. The rugged individual pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. The American dream, everything can happen if you just work hard. Idea is something that's a very implicitly a very dualistic free will idea.
Oh man, I'm ready to get rid
That
of
is
that
how it works.
nonsense. Like, just
Well, yeah,
as someone that's drowning in it here, like.
right, right, right.
But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I'm also reminded of something I read, and I'm probably gonna mess this up, but my memory uh, tells me that there was some research about the different types of crops grown in China, and actually, depending on what type of crop grew better in the region, like whether you were growing like wheat or rice, those crops themselves lend the societies around them to different uh, methods of harvest, some more individualistic and some more collectivist, and that has cultural implications.
Wow.
So you start from, you know, the geographic level, and then you get into like the biological level of like what the geography is good for as far as crops, and then how the crops behave, and the cultures are influenced by that. And so you have this like really complex picture that ends up shaping our subjective psychological experience. And it's like you can't just point to one factor in all that, but at the same time, it's, I don't know, it's really fascinating how something like, I don't know, whether you grow rice or wheat might affect the way you actually view the world. And of
Yeah, and
course,
isn't
we're
that
big on wheat in the States. Like
right?
that
Right.
was a big deal. Like
Right. Isn't but
rice,
isn't it
to my knowledge.
but isn't it really interesting that we hear these types of stories all the time? You know, we know, um, um, we know advertising works, and we hear stories of this like this all the time. We know that we can make someone like someone better or less depending on the temperature of the drink they're holding,
Hmm.
and we know about this, we hear about this, we hear from psychology that we have a subconscious that does all kinds of things we have no idea about, and we hear about genetics, we hear about selfish genes, right? Like we hear about all of these things, and then eventually someone says, hey, did you know there's no free will? And everyone loses their mind. And it should sort of be obvious. It's like, well, yes, of course there's no free will in that sense. Like,
It
but
seems
what?
like the clear conclusion that like the
Yeah,
that that abstract concept of free will keeps like retreating. Like some people talk about, you know, some people in skeptic or atheist communities talk about like the god of the gaps or something like that.
right,
Like your monotheistic deity keeps like retreating in the face of more objective explanations.
right.
And I feel like we are dealing with a free will of the gaps type phenomenon where like it seems like every year, every few years, some other area that we used to attribute to free will like has to retreat to, you know, more objective scientific explanations.
Yes. Yeah, I think Susan Blackmore also mentioned this once, that this is just the next step that we have to take, and a lot of people are worried about it. But science does this all the time, and we figured out that the sun doesn't go around us; we go around it, and
Which, hey, was really offensive. Like,
yeah, that was, people were killed for that, right? And we figured out that we're part of the rest of the animal world, and that we're not some freak exception to the rest of nature. And now this is just the next step, and people are now okay with explaining all of the genetic influence that shapes our lives, and all our environmental influences that shape our lives, and people are prepared to say that the self is a benign user illusion, and like everyone, we're this close, but then there people stop and say, well, no, but we have to keep free will in. And
yeah, otherwise
and I
it'll all collapse.
yeah, and I just wonder if that one word is really that heavy. I just don't think it is. I just think that this is just something that eventually people are gonna catch on to it. Just the way evolution by natural selection, no serious person questions that entire theory.
Right.
We're just gonna slowly move towards something like that with the the fact that we're biological organisms, and that there's not something magic that can be the first initiator of action.
Right.
Um,
I
yeah,
maybe we want to move. We had some topic set up, and I think we're
Right,
set up to transition into the discussion about compatibilism and basic
right,
dessert. I listened to Susan Blackmore lecture at Science and Non-Duality to kind of once again kind of jog my memory. It had been a little while since I'd really like dove into her work, but
right.
it's really enjoyable. So if anyone's watching doesn't know who this person is, please YouTube them, Google them. Like you'll find good stuff. But one of the things she brought up was that she was having a discussion with Daniel Dennett, our favorite compatibilist, and she was really trying to pin him down on why he insists on retaining the concept of free will. Kind of like we were mentioning, it's like you get him that close, and then it's like, what are we losing with that little thing? And he admits, like, his concern, what we're losing is like our social order, like the justification for the punitive measures we inflict on people and such. And to me, that's kind of the point. Like we've constructed uh, our culture, our society on these assumptions that seem to be incorrect. And it's, to me, it makes sense to like to really question the whole order rather than massaging the definitions so we can keep the game going as it's been going. I, I
Right,
to me, it seems like we're doing things the wrong way, or at least
right,
suboptimally. I don't know if this is a right and wrong situation, but we could be doing better.
right. Yeah. When it comes to compatibilism, it's just like, um, I don't have a problem with compatibilism in the basic sense. Like if there's, um, you know, technically, there's nothing wrong with redefining a word, right? Like that's
Right,
fine.
right,
That's cool. And depending on your definition of free will, I either do or not have it, and it's and that's fine. The only problem I would have is, um well, first of all, does the person see just desert responsibility as a problem, and does their compatibilist free will um actually get you this just desserts? um and you can be a compatibilist, but just be clear about it. Just, that's my only thing. Like, I have no problem with compatibilism per se. I have a problem with it if it only gets used to not talk about the implications of what it means to not have the sort of free will that would give you epic moral responsibility.
right. Like I had Chris Anderson on the show, and I know you've seen that one. And he had his own conception of compatibilism, which seemed perfectly fine to me. Like I don't know why I would have any sort of like deep qualm with that situation. It's more the the people who want to preserve the institutions that were based on those initially libertarian assumptions, and then they're not willing to critically analyze those institutions to see what we can do about it. And even having read some Dennett, I know he kind of I feel like he kind of waffles on this stuff where he's like, of course I'm open to reforming things and making them better and whatnot, but then like in Elbow Room, he spends a lot of time justifying the current, criminal justice system, and to me, it's a terrible justification. Like makes no sense, especially if you're willing to admit that you accept determinism, and then you're also like, those people were determined to go to jail. Like, it's like, well, shit, that sucks. Um,
Right,
I feel like take a we could zoom in more on what actually causes people, to engage in the type of behavior that ends up like landing them in a jail cell, and we could have so much more effective intervention if we're willing to rethink these institutions critically. And so,
right,
yeah, I don't know, and I think the basic dessert framework is really useful for that, because I think it cuts back a lot of the kind of semantic confusion and the sort of you see a lot of people talking past each other on that subject.
Yeah, what I can definitely recommend is the new book that's coming out by Daniel Dennett and Greg Caruso. They have a book coming up debating free will and just desert. So that's going to be a very interesting one.
Yeah,
Uh,
I read the article on that. I'm very excited for that book because I feel like this is like a really useful step, and there's not that
it
many useful
is.
steps in the conversation.
Right.
A lot of
Yeah.
times you go in circles, and I feel like they're actually like grabbing a hold of something that matters here. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
uh,
very much looking forward to that one. So we're gonna hear more. I haven't read Elbow Room, so I can't comment too much on that.
hey, save yourself the time. No, I mean, read it if you want. I felt like I at least understood him better. I understood his position better. I didn't spend so much time after that going like, what's he talking about? Why does he say that? Like, but
Right.
but yeah, ultimately I was pretty disappointed in like he spends several chapters kind of warming you up and like massaging your intuitions, and then in the last couple chapters he tries to like slip in his conclusion, and I was like, no, I don't accept any of this. Like,
All right.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to prejudice you against it. But
Yeah.
that
No.
that was
No.
my impression.
No. I know the books I've read. The books I've read from Dennett have been all very insightful and nice to read. But none of them were specifically on the topic of free will. Also, because personally, I mean, I could have been perhaps a compatibilist if I had a very extreme sensation of free will,
Yeah,
but I'm sort of these weird people who does I don't really feel like I have this control over my thoughts and actions in this way that most people seem to be having.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
so
I think
for
that's
me,
very
it
much.
would just be weird for me to say that I have free will because I don't even feel like I have it, right?
Right.
So it would really mean that I just um yeah, it would be strange for me because the free will I'm talking about, my mom does feel like that. My mom really does, like,
Right.
she has her own free will and she does something because she wants to, and then it happens and she does it, right?
Yeah.
She can choose what to do. Like, that's how she really feels. I don't feel like that. And I found in the past 4 years that actually many other people also don't feel like that. Um, Susan Blackmore is one. Um, and Sam Harris also, and a few others. And yeah, there's nothing in my world where I could attribute it to. It's not in physics, and it's also not in my subjective experience. So I don't have this need to refer to this illusion all the time. I don't experience it. It's not here.
What are you talking about? Um, I definitely want to come back. I don't think we've done enough on basic dessert or just dessert yet, so I want to talk about that more. But I want to ask you a quick question. Did you read Dennett's book on consciousness? Because I haven't read that yet.
I read
And
part of it.
okay,
The thing is, I really want to understand this one, because I mean, you're talking about consciousness explained.
yeah, I believe so.
Right.
I believe that's the
Right.
title.
Right. Because
Because
you know,
my understanding is his conclusion is that he basically is one of the people saying it's just not a thing.
right, right. And the thing is, it's like there is a lot of people writing negatively about this book, right? And part of it might be that they just didn't grant him the title, right? The title was perhaps a bit too boastful. Conscious,
Okay,
yeah. But
fair enough.
it's a very, very serious academic work, and lots has been written about it, and it's not a nonsense book, right? Like, there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Maybe people are just going a little too hard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he has been called the devil in an academic paper. Like, you know
That's
what I mean?
amazing.
Right.
Oh my god.
So, and I just wonder if that is completely justified. I wonder because there's some pretty amazing stuff too if you allow yourself to open up to some. I mean, Susan Blackmore's rather positive about the book,
Okay.
and also he made some interesting predictions about particular what was I don't know if it was something about the visual system. I have to go look that up for the next time, but
Maybe
he
it's
did.
been a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been a minute. I have to go look that up for the next time. But he did do some predictions in there that later turned out to be true, to be confirmed. And it's just like it's actually a really interesting book. So I don't, it's called Consciousness Explained Away by a lot of people, um, and
Oh,
there might be some truth to that. But yeah, I want to really take the time for it because I don't want to underestimate it.
yeah.
Uh,
Dennett's not my favorite, so I'm probably just being unfair. Like, there's,
Right.
I,
Yeah, no, but that's what I run into a lot of free will skeptics that sort of instantly go like, But the thing is, though,
yeah,
I find myself agreeing with Dennett on a number of other topics,
sure,
like on
sure.
a number of other topics. But it's just when it comes to free will, it's just I don't understand. I just don't get it. Um, but
Yeah, I
but
don't know.
yeah, he is one of he's in my book a very very interesting philosopher in our time.
Maybe you would like
And
Elbow Room, or maybe it is, worth your time just to, because I do feel like I at least understand him better after taking
right,
it in. So, um, let's get on to maybe get a little more deep into the basic dessert, the just dessert discussion, because these aren't terms that Susan Blackmore tends to use, to my knowledge. I You kind of introduced me to this aspect of the whole discussion through Dirk
right,
Paraboom and Greg Caruso, and
right,
I believe some others. But uh, I feel like this is the whole time I've been exposed to like the free will discussion. I feel like this is really at the heart of what I've wanted to hear about, like what I've wanted to discuss, because
right.
it's like, and I didn't have the language for it, so I'm really excited that the discussion's moving in this direction. I feel like this is where we'll actually get um, some traction as far as like improving on those those institutions we have in society that do
Absolutely.
seem dysfunctional. So yeah, maybe
Especially if I look at like I don't know. Sometimes I see on TV, right? I see there's a television program called American Prisons, right?
I can't
That
imagine how bad it is. Like,
that's a show we have, and to us, that's just straight up shocking from beginning to end. Just everything, just
we're
is just wild.
we're like less than 5% of the world, and I think we house like 20% or more of the world's prisoners. It's like
Yeah.
the stats are just amazing. We just love
Yes.
locking people up and ruining their
Right.
lives. Like, we're into
Right.
it. Like, we're
Right.
it's,
And also the type of prisons you go to, right? And it's just like it's intense.
yeah,
And that yeah. It's just very, very intense. I don't even know what to say about it. It's
yeah.
just
We're like there's so much evidence that we're doing the wrong thing here, and yet
yes.
we have these like cultural and even philosophical justifications for doing so, and it's like, but they're not good. Like, it doesn't matter if they exist, it matters if they're actually like sound, if they actually
Right.
create rehabilitation in people, like, and they're
Right.
just not doing it, and there's
Right. Right.
better models out there, like.
Right. Why are we like what like why do we do what we do with them, right? Is it that's what the question is. And if it's purely for punishment in the you did a bad thing and now um you deserve what you get, right? It's just
Right.
like
And this is what we mean by dessert.
Right, right,
this philosophical usage. We're not talking about like the sweet thing at the end of the meal.
right.
We're, we're talking about like whether someone can truly deserve like the results of their actions. Like, does that
Right.
even make sense?
Yes,
And
is someone ultimately responsible for who they are and what they do? That's what we're talking about.
right, which from like a scientific perspective, like trying to understand human behavior, like I don't think you can square that one. Like I don't think you can say
No.
people are their own. Like I learned the term what is it, causa sui, is the like
Yes,
the Latin term for being like self-causing. And
right,
it's like we're just not the cause of ourselves. Like
right.
it just can't be. And so yeah, that puts you down a path that we definitely need to travel as a society. We need to ask ourselves these deep questions of like, you know, if you're not the cause of yourself, if people aren't, you know, self-generating their behavior, if it's actually this dance of, you know, this biological trajectory that we're born with, and then also like the environmental shaping of that process, like if that's the case, like how do we affect that trajectory in a positive manner rather than just abusing people? Because that's what we do right now. It's just a system of abuse
Yes.
that makes behavior statistically worse. Like you wouldn't.
And it's not working. It's not deterring
Yeah,
crime.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like even if you're someone that's like into punishing someone so that they'll become a better person, like I my understanding is that makes no sense. However, if that is your motivation to create a better person, we can still have a conversation about how that would happen in a sound way rather than a
Absolutely.
counterproductive way. Like
Absolutely. And you know, you don't want them to get out worse than they went in, and that seems to be the case right now. And it's like, well, then what are you gonna do? You know, open the jails? And it's not. It's like, calm down. All
that's what I
right,
want to do. I want to go like full Batman villain and just let all the bad guys
right,
out.
right. But
Ex-
this is a serious question you
yeah,
get when you talk
yeah.
about these things, and it's just like, no, what we don't want to abolish it, we want to make it better. It's like, and you know, it's not this black and white. It's like
Right.
the excessive and deep blaming of people for things that are utterly outside of their authorship and control.
Hmm.
That needs to go. So we change also our way we look at these people, and that changes the way we're going to treat them as well. Because, you know, if your car breaks down, you know, you don't you don't you don't blow up your car, right? Like you just
I just beat on mine. I physically
right,
fix it, and that
yeah.
always corrects it every time.
Right,
It's perfect.
right. No, yeah, you just look what the mistake is, and you repair the and that's what rehabilitation is, right? So
Right.
instead of hating someone because they did an evil thing, right? We're gonna fear someone and quarantine that person to keep the rest safe, and then we're gonna try as best as we can to rehabilitate that person so we can potentially send them back into society without them having that same malfunctioning
Right.
again, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I really at some point I want to review Greg Caruso's talk on that subject because I don't know that I've ever heard a clearer like
It's yeah,
a more comprehensive address of that problem. I
and it's just 10 minutes, and yeah, it's a great
right.
talk. He nails it. Yeah, it's one of my favorite TED talks ever.
We'll have to do that sometime.
Right,
Um, let's see. I don't know. Do we want to talk about I we're we've been on for a while. I did want to get to the question you brought up about meaning and life without free will because
right,
this is I think we kind of touched on it a little bit in the conversation, but this is one of those fears
right.
that keeps people from allowing themselves to think critically about the subject. They're like, well, if I give that up, then life has no meaning. I'm just some kind of meat robot or something like that, you know.
Right.
and it's like, well, to us that are on the other side of that thing, it's not a fear that I have.
Right,
But we talked about how a lot of this stuff is relates to culture and particular language habits and stuff, and that stuff runs deep, and it connects with your nervous system. It can really trigger some deep and uncomfortable feelings, and so this is one of the
right,
things I want to get. Just personally, I want to get a little bit better about, a little more strategic with my communication, and try not to say so many things that are quite so like immediately threatening. I want to find like a better
right.
way to have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. It is difficult. It's also it depends on the person you're talking to, is what I noticed. And perhaps it's also just pointing out that there's lots of people who don't believe in free will who are doing fine. So apparently it's possible somehow, right, to live with
Right.
this knowledge and not just fall down in despair. There is a way, because people are succeeding at it. We talked about Susan Blackmore a lot. She is, doing her work, going about giving lectures.
And she's just a pure delight. Like, she's just so much fun. Like,
Yeah,
I,
she's fine, and like
there's
lots of people are fine, so it's possible. But like, I sort of get it. I get it. Um, I mean, I guess one crucial difference is also that perhaps it's different if you discover it than when someone tells you. It's like when someone just tells you, it's like, oh, well, what do you mean I don't have free will? It's like almost offensive, right? But if you sort of
feel like someone's like
explore this.
feel like someone's stealing something from you, maybe.
Right,
Like,
right, right, right. But if you sort of explore the topic, and you hear some neuroscientists speak, and then you read a book about it, and if it's that type of exploratory way, then perhaps that doesn't happen that often. I mean, it just didn't happen to me because I never had this big realization moment of like, whoa, there's no free will. That never occurred to me. It was just like, always thought it was confusing, and then I heard someone say, hey, it's not a thing, and I was like, of course it's not a thing,
well,
and it
that
just like
that makes more sense.
clicked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just clicked to me. So I have sort of the opposite experience, where now sort of neuroscience starts to kind of agree, and like lots of philosophers agree, and it's like, but the mainstream is all like, who's this weird guy who doesn't believe in free will? And it's
Right.
um, but yeah, so how did you feel when you got into this, and when you, like, why would you say that it didn't cost you your sense of meaning? Because my sense of meaning was sort of never based on me being able to do what I want to do in each moment in that sense anyways. So
Yeah, I think at least on this particular topic, I think I lucked out as well. And I don't know if my memory serves me perfectly, but um, I had already sort of become disillusioned with a number of other, social institutions and concepts and whatnot. And so
right,
the sort of philosophy and the content, I had already kind of drifted in a sort of social science direction, and I was taking in philosophy that wasn't like necessarily emphasizing free will. It was more about like like some like Alan Watts stuff, for
right,
example, where he kind of emphasizes like coming to harmony with your environment, and kind of in a Zen Tao
right.
type way. So like
Yeah, he was really careful with it. He could really like he
I
could really say things like, have you ever noticed your breathing, that if you don't pay attention to it, that it kind of just keeps going anyways?
yeah, yeah. So I feel
It's
like
very subtle.
my experience with a number of other subjects was much more rough, and by the time I
Right.
came to this one, I was like, ah, yeah, whatever, no big deal. Like I just
Yeah.
but yeah, but I've been punched too
Yeah.
many times at this point. I
Yeah.
don't feel nothing anymore. No, not like that. But but yeah, it wasn't this big crisis for me. It was actually kind of like you were saying yourself, it really resolved a lot of confusion in my mind at that point because I was trying to
Right.
square uh, stuff I was learning, in anthropology and
Right.
a lot of stuff I was learning in, other subjects, and you can't really square that information with the idea that everyone's just driving their own life. Like it's like
Yeah,
no,
it's like
there's
you
too
could
many patterns.
you could say that almost every science is just, you know, trying to find cause and effect relationships between things.
Right.
It's like,
And it's like those relationships are so strong and so
yeah,
so plentiful that it's like, well, where's the wiggle room, where's the elbow room for like, especially like a libertarian conception,
yes, absolutely.
where it's like that stuff just makes less and less sense the more you know about how the brain operates, the more you know about how societies operate, and the more you know about like linguistics and culture,
Right,
and all that stuff starts to add up, and you're like, where is this free will of the gaps? Like where
right,
what's left of it? And it's like there's so many holes shot through it that,
right.
I mean, I suppose you can take the compatibilist route and reconcile it with what's going on in the rest of the academic world. But to me, it made the most sense to just take that little extra step and just be like,
Yeah,
I don't think this is happening at all. Like, I don't think we have to save this. I think we can do just fine without it.
right. Yeah. Well, how I looked at it is that, because I never really had this sensation of free will in the sense that, I don't know, I just felt really different about my experiences as opposed to how other people would talk about their experiences. But I did have the realization like, oh, okay, there's like a whole debate about this, and there's a whole lot of interesting scientific evidence connected to this. So I did have sort of the realization like, wow, this is really a thing. I'm not just overthinking. And when I figured that out, to me, it was like nothing valuable about my life is lost because I realized I never had free will, and all my experiences up until that point were compatible with a world in which there isn't any free will. Because the thing is, it was never there, and it's like what it loses is you lose a rational justification for anger and hate.
Right.
I mean, it
Right.
doesn't mean, but
Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. We broke up there for a few
oh shit.
seconds, but if you could back up like a sentence.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I said it's not like emotions will not arise anymore, but the intense self-justification, this, oh, I have every right to be angry, this, like that, you don't get to do that anymore.
Yeah.
That sort of goes away, and things like, you know, um, pride and shame, those things don't make a lot of sense, but those are isolating emotions. Those weren't fun to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Fuck that
and
shit.
and yeah, it's just like it makes them a little bit less horrible because you can just kind of go like, oh, that's causality for you. It's like you can just take a deep breath and don't blame yourself so extensively,
Right.
and and viewing yourself as an open system, open to change from the outside constantly, just makes evolving and self-regulation and emotional stability more possible because grow the environment has an effect on how you behave. Your behavior changes the environment. This causal connection is what makes things matter. It's what makes you connect to me. It's what makes everyone, you know, that's sort of what you need to have meaningful anything
Right.
is that it makes sense. And that sounds sort of very obvious, but that's already sort of where this free will thing, where you are the ultimate cause of your thoughts and by extension your actions, is already undercut if you just realize that.
Right. Yeah. I think also, I guess part of the incentive to understand and adopt this sort of way of thinking was that I better understood the connection between human behavior and environment and our potential for shaping, our behavioral outcomes. Um,
Right.
all of a sudden, and I'm not talking about some like B.F. Skinner type. I feel like his logic was a bit oversimplified. We're not exactly pigeons or whatnot, but there were some good thoughts there. I feel like yeah, that all of a sudden we have this method for understanding who we are in relation to the environment, in relation to each other. We can dig deeper into these behavioral problems instead of just throwing people in cages and thinking we're doing them and society a favor when we're not. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I feel like with this realization on a popular level, we'll be in position to drastically improve our social order. And so I don't know. I know we've had these discussions before, and I'm kind of maybe overly optimistic, or maybe you're overly pessimistic. We don't always line up perfectly on this stuff, but I feel like there is at least that potential. Whether or not it happens, who knows? Like
Right.
we
No,
may just
yeah.
be circling the drain right
Well,
now. Hope not.
I think improvement is good regardless, right?
Right,
Like, I
right.
think
I like it.
yeah, we should still try, you know, even though even though I'm a bit pessimistic, like we should still try.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think, no matter what the view, I think that's what matters is the action, and
right.
we
And
take the action, and then we'll adjust our views depending on the results. Like,
right, right. Like one thing you said though about the free will of the gaps, that's why I want to talk about the subjective experience side,
yeah,
because the idea I'm toying with is that um, this illusion of free will is not this very deeply ingrained, solid illusion that we just can't live without. And it almost sort of became the mantra of the free will debate to sort of explain what the problem is. People are very eager to say, well, there's just no logical argument for free will, and all the science and all the theory is against it, but we just can't help but feel as if we have free will.
oh man,
And
Chomsky does that. It kills me. I
yeah, well,
love Chomsky. I love the guy,
right.
but yeah,
Yeah,
he
but
makes that
not
move.
only, but most people actually make that move. Like also hardcore free will skeptics also make that move, right? There are people who say free will is absolutely impossible, who still say, but we still feel as if we have it. And the more I read about it, the more I think about it, the less I think that that's true. I'm actually right now at the point, also maybe to counter it a little bit. I'm actually at the
Ooh,
point of I'm at the point of saying that free will is actually a rather flimsy illusion.
yeah,
It's like an illusion that doesn't take too much self scrutiny to sort of see through. Like, okay, yeah, if I did really have free will, everything would be vastly different.
right,
It's like it's also the experience people report as free will is also not actual libertarian free will. It's just an experience that's sort of, and free will is sort of the heuristic to make that experience make sense in the moment. And it's
exactly.
just like, but if you actually had libertarian free will, it would be vastly different from what you're experiencing, because there's never a moment, and it's sort of like a lot of people sort of look past it because it's like they're too late when they're realizing they come in too late with the awareness of, oh, I'm not creating this, right? They're sort of like, oh, I can choose to lift my hand up right now and I do it, right?
Right.
But you first had to have that particular thought, right? And there was no moment in which you, subjectively speaking, authored that thought consciously. There was never a moment where you went like, what am I gonna say next? Well, I'm gonna say the sentence like this. I,
Uh,
you
you
know,
you can't think what you think before you think it. Like it's
right,
it's that
right.
thing, yeah.
That's that thing, right? And
Like
and
thoughts
that
happen to
sentence,
you. they don't. You're not writing the thoughts are writing you. Like,
Right, and that sentence, like, you can't think your thoughts before you think it. Like, that
right.
is a very hard one also for people to sort of grasp, because that sounds like it just doesn't make sense, and that's sort of the thing. Yes, it does, because that's not what's going on. And
Right.
they say, well, yes, but that couldn't be going on. And it's like, yes, but that's what libertarian free will implies is going
Yeah.
on, and it's not. And yeah, so that's the thing. So why I wanted to say with the free will of the gaps thing is that this subjective experience thing is for a lot of people the last sort of hiccup, where even free will skeptics will say, well, yeah, it's still very weird because we feel as if we have it, and but it's just like, yeah, but we don't really feel like we have it, though. We sort of loosely feel like we have it, but if you really think about what it would be to have free will and to consciously author your thoughts, that's just, you can't point to anything in your subjective experience that's that. That's
Right.
sort of the thing. And some
Yeah.
people have a really hard time with this. And it's like, I guess you have to at least know how to meditate to sort of get at it deeply, but most people can intuit it once they are just led to inspect their own experience a little bit more closely. It's not this impossibility to overcome.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think your use of the word heuristic, like that's really what's I feel like that's a good tool. It in itself is a good heuristic. It's a meta heuristic.
Yeah,
No, but
right,
it's a good way of understanding that this is like a concept that you're mapping on to an experience that probably doesn't actually map on that well. Like
right,
there's a number of things, you can look all around different societies, different cultures, and you can see that there's all kinds of heuristics for interpreting the world, and some of it's more or less accurate, and you tend to get results based on,
right,
not always based 100% on the accuracy, but there tends to be a relationship there. Like if you're interpreting the world in a nonsensical way, it makes it harder to move through. And I think this is one of those things where like we have a lot of struggle and suffering in our society, and it relates to this heuristic where we tend to internalize the causes of a lot of things that happen to us.
right.
We have this notion of the just world where like we're receiving what we deserve. It all goes back to desserts, and it's I think the term heuristic was really good there because it highlights that we're talking about a concept and not just people just accept it uncritically.
Yeah,
And it's one of those
I
things, it's like you got to get people to dig in on that action of mapping it onto your experience, and it's like you got to
right.
parse those things apart.
Yes, I'm not saying people don't feel as if they have free will,
Right.
but I'm saying it's a meme and not a gene, right? That's basically the
Nice.
distinction I'm making. It's not wired, ingrained in us. It's not impossible to overcome it. It's just, I mean, if you have the feeling that you have free will and you're happy with that feeling, fine. That's fine, right? Like, even if you can be a free will skeptic and still be like, oh yeah, but I live my life as if I have free will. Lots of people do that.
Right.
I'm just saying you don't have to. You don't have to live as if you have free will. You don't even have to feel as if you have free will. And and yeah, and I just think the universal claim that nobody can feel as if they don't have free will, is just a strange claim to make. Also, if you think about, a lot of these people have knowledge about the neurodiversity of people walking around, and you just wouldn't expect such a generalized statement about something like that,
Right.
because um
How could you possibly justify it?
yeah,
Like,
and here's the other thing. Imagine if there was only one person on earth that felt like he had free will.
yeah.
You would be in a psychiatric hospital if there was only one person who felt like that. You would be studied by scientists like, this person has some weird anomaly, and you know,
They think they're causing things. Like
yeah,
they think they're generating their own behavior. They don't
yeah,
understand it's,
it
the
it would
various factors that contribute to it.
right. It would be very weird, but it's just like it's been a debate for so long, is because most people that walk around really feel like they do have it, right?
Hmm.
And some libertarians would also say that that's actually a good argument for it, that it's so central to our experience that we just can't neglect the subjective side of this. Uh, that's something they say, and that's why I want to say, well, let's also explore that subjective aspect. Then let's see if it's really such an impossible illusion to overcome. And various free will skeptics are starting to do this and starting to say, hey, I also didn't really feel, I also don't feel this sensation anymore. And it's, you
Yeah,
know,
I feel like if anything, this side of the conversation, like in diving into that, is really uh, giving that feeling more attention than the other side. Like the other side's just taking it for granted that everyone feels this thing, and it's
right,
like, no, you can't just assert that. You have to really like dig in and see if it's true. And I mean, there's the notion of like the black swan, where like once upon a time people thought, all swans are white until we discovered a black swan. And it's like,
right,
it's just this thing where like you can't really know that what you're asserting is true, and there's a decent chance it's at least untrue in some sense, and it may be like really untrue.
yeah,
uh and yeah, no, I think that's a very fascinating angle to like to kind of call the bluff on that claim and really dig in and
yeah,
ask, is that subjective sense true? Because you know I've subjectively felt all kinds of things,
yes,
and there's
exactly,
plenty of those experiences weren't like you say ontologically true. So
right. And it's also like, um, what I'm suggesting is that if you give it some time, like just remember, uh, when you do the trick with the optic blind spot with your thumb, and you see your thumb disappear, just remember um, how satisfactory that is, how much it proves the optic blind spot to you, how it becomes undeniable to you that you don't have this full visual field.
I think my
And
thumb literally disappears. I think
right,
I think I
right,
just don't have a thumb in that moment. No.
right. Right, but for real, like that is something which can happen with this free will feeling too, at least
Yeah.
to some people. And I wonder if you really have this experience, I wonder if it also changes people's views on how important it is. Because, and also, even if you don't get this experience, if you don't get this introspection, and you look into yourself and you're like, okay, I'm talking right now, so which part of this sentence am I creating while I'm saying it? Like, it's sort of coming out, and while I'm speaking, I hear what I'm going to say as I'm going along, right? And eventually the sentence ends, and sometimes I fail to end the sentences, sometimes I don't, right? But it will end, and when it ends, it's as much a surprise to me as it is to you, basically, if I pay attention to that, right?
Yeah.
But even if that doesn't work, then you can still look up lots of um, more special cases. I mean, there's people that have aphantasia, for example. Some of those don't have much of an inner monologue at all, right? So they don't have most of the conscious thoughts that we have every day. They just don't have them, right? But they function just fine, just as any other person. So
Right.
a lot of our conscious thoughts are not even necessary. You can function perfectly fine without those things ever reaching consciousness, because some people have the type of brain where they actually don't have this conscious monologue of thoughts, right? And they're
Right.
fine. They're fine. They're functional. They're just doing all the things we do, right? Having normal conversations. Everything is working. They don't forget to eat. It's fine. And yeah, just knowing that that's possible, right? And how strange and different it must be, because I sort of have the most boring guy ever in my head, right? It's just, you know telling me all kinds of things constantly, mostly negative, mostly about me, right?
Damn.
And
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
yeah,
It's
right?
true.
And
Stop being so honest.
right. But apparently, if you don't have that at all and it's just silent, right, you can just do all of those things. You're not.
All right. No, that's something I saw recently is that the vast majority of our self-talk is negative thoughts about ourselves, and
Right.
it's like that's not necessarily useful. I mean, it's not necessarily
No.
unuseful, but it's like, damn,
And
do we really have to be so hard on ourselves? Like maybe,
but the creepy thing also is if you never notice that, if you never notice that there's this undercurrent of thought constantly influencing your behavior,
mm,
right? If you want to talk about places where you can have some autonomy and where you can at least make more options available to yourself, to me, it's there. It's noticing that you're actually thinking and what effect your thoughts actually have on you and on your expressions in your day-to-day life.
right,
I think
right,
noticing that is important, and just noticing your thoughts more clearly also immediately makes it easier to sort of let go of a lot of rumination, a lot of I should have said this in that conversation type of things, that type of thinking.
be
You can just
be skeptical of that guy in your head because he may be an asshole.
right, like, but if you become aware of it, then you that takes away the assholeness of that guy in your head a bit,
Right,
right?
right, yeah,
It's like if you're at the concert and one person is acting like an asshole and everyone stops what they're doing and points at them, they
yeah,
stop immediately, right?
yeah,
It's just hella awkward all of a sudden. They never expected this, and now they're being pointed at by hundreds of people, and it just stops.
yeah,
And you can sort of realize, become aware of, hey, I'm constantly repeating this story of this awkward conversation with my nephew that I had over and over and over again to myself, right? And noticing that makes it so ridiculous that you're doing that to yourself that that you just step away from that, and that you
disconnect a
be
little
like,
bit.
yeah. And instead of staying angry for 4 hours, right, you can stay angry for 15 minutes and then
Right.
go about your day. But again, obviously, because people will say, well, oh, do you have the free will to, and it's like, no. It's like you have you get more options by practicing this, which is a causal process again,
Right.
right? And because it's a causal process and because you can practice it, it actually has an effect, not
Yeah.
because I created it, but it's because uh, the environment I live in and my genetics in this environment and their interaction between those things eventually got me to a point, a lucky point, where I started to get into this. And when I started to notice, like, hey, okay, so there's no free will, but I can try to be more aware of what I'm thinking before I verbalize it into something completely counterproductive to my life, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I feel like this is one of those areas where people kind of interpret the situation backwards, and it's like if I did have free will, obviously I wouldn't do this stuff to myself. like like it wouldn't be such
Right,
a struggle to cease these things. And I like
right,
to also, whenever people bring that up, because you said the word try, and they'll be like, oh well, you said try, that means you're
right,
trying, like I like to bring up that, like, the fact that the idea is like suggested to you in the first place, like that's like your first moment of conditioning, and
right,
like your brain will either like accept or reject that idea, and you're not really choosing whether you accept or reject ideas, it's just
right. Yeah,
what you're predisposed to in the moment.
yeah,
A lot of stuff that was proposed to me in the past, I rejected it until years later it occurs to me that it's true, and it's like,
right.
oh well, I didn't try one way or the other,
Yeah,
it just happened.
right,
And
right.
so yeah, I feel like the free will discussion is one of these conversations where it's really hard to get um, people that have like bought in heavily to the idea to even understand what's being said on the other side. So I feel like that's like the big challenge is putting these ideas in a digestible format.
Yeah, I think one complication there and what people run into is that it feels kind of double to a lot of people that on one hand we're saying, oh, this free will thing is this huge illusion that we all have, and it's this, and on the other hand we're saying, but it doesn't matter that free will doesn't exist, right? So we should just get on with it.
Uh,
And so it feels to a lot of people, I think, very double that, well, you're saying something doesn't exist, and then you're saying that, um, okay, it doesn't exist, but it's actually not a problem that it doesn't exist, right? So, okay, so why are we talking about it then? But it's like, yeah, but the problem is most people operate as though it does exist.
yeah, yeah,
And that's
it's
why we're talking about it, because there is a pragmatic aspect here that most people live out their lives um, as though they are justified in implicating free will in a lot of things.
right,
And well, like
which has consequences.
in the world, yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So that is at the heart of like why it's important to critically examine all this stuff is because there are consequences, and I would I would argue like there's a connection between the amazingly punitive system of justice in quotes here in the U.S. and the fact that we do buy into this so strongly. And
I
I
think
still
I
oh
think
go
the
ahead.
U.S. I think the U.S. court actually ruled there. It's in black and white actually that free will is a universal and persistent assumption
Yeah,
in the U.S. justice system, and determinism is incompatible with that. And it's just a complete non-starter. It's just like that's not something that's kind of the case. They actually state that that is the case. That yeah.
yeah. I forget when that was done, but I've read that ruling as well, or that opinion, or I don't know what the technical term for the document was, but yeah, this is something that American courts have established as like, look, if we don't all believe this, then what we're doing falls apart, and it's like
Right.
that's the point.
Right,
That's
right, and
because what we're doing doesn't work.
right, and the black and white fallacy that always comes up is that it's either the system we have or no system, right? As if there is no way where we can say, okay, right now, science and the best information we currently have shows us that people are just not ultimately responsible for what they do and therefore can't ultimately be punished for what they do, especially not harshly, right?
Right.
And I think the interesting thing Greg Caruso brings up is next to quarantining individuals um, and rehabilitating them, um, he also adds that we should really put the money and resources in the prevention of crime,
Hell yeah.
um, and that's where the real attention should be, because as a free will skeptic you understand that there is causes behind these behaviors, and if you can look at these causes and you can make the causes go away, then we prevent the criminal behavior from occurring in the first place. And um, we want sort of the minute when you're already at the point of being quarantined, that already shows that the preventions are still a bit off. Apparently, if we have to really take you out all the way out of society, and then apparently we're already right. There's
Right. Yeah.
already
We missed all the opportunities along the way that led to that behavior, and
right.
any one of those points would have been a point of intervention that could have prevented that.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving it structure.
No,
Yeah.
it made sense.
Right. No, but that's the thing, and I just that just makes so much sense to me, because you know how your average atheist argument is, well, if you would have been born in India, you would have been a Hindu. But it's like, yeah, but it's like that for everything.
Right.
Like you don't choose your parents, you don't choose the time in history in which you're born, right? You don't choose the language you speak, and you don't choose all the interactions that will happen after your birth, up
Yeah.
until the point where you either uh, do A or you do B or C, right?
Yeah,
And
like even if you grant a person some type of like libertarian action in their brain or something like that, there's so many external factors that like
yeah,
how
yeah,
much
you
would
could
it
even
even
say,
matter? Like so
you
like
could, yeah,
you can even grant people like their assumptions, but
right.
it's just like the empirical evidence for all of the factors that shape your behavior stack up to the point where it's like you didn't choose to be born in a universe with gravity, and then like I mean
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
it
like it's
gets really
all
big.
science. It's all science. If you look at, like, in physics, people are explaining things in by causal mechanisms between them. In chemistry, how do different chemical interactions occur? What happened? What is the effect if you combine this with this? In psychology, you have concepts like the unconscious, and you have suggestibility, and there's all kinds of things we can do to manipulate behavior when in a psychological setting. um, and you can also, and in neuroscience, if you do experiments there, right, you can poke someone's brain, give it an electromechanical signal, and the patient's arm will go up like that. And if you ask them, why did you do that? They say, oh, I wanted to wave to that nurse that walked by, or
Yeah,
something. They
the
just
brain
give
just
you,
naturally gives out stories for what it
yeah,
like.
yeah, and all of those things. It's just like, if someone proved libertarian free will tomorrow, it would be absolute dynamite to science. It would be like, it would invalidate all the psychology I know about.
Right,
And yeah, and that's just the thing. It's just like you can't square it. And that's why I think the subjective side is interesting, is that, like, because that's what people really hold on to. But once we discover that even the subjective side is penetrable and
right.
isn't this impossible to overcome illusion, um then what's left, right? Like, it the same what happened to the soul, right? All these things that were previously attributed to the soul, right? Like, you know, being conscious, having thoughts, emotions, creativity.
Or even like bad behavior. You'd be like, oh well, that person has an evil soul or something like that, you know. And it's like,
Right,
well, we now understand scientifically, like behavior comes from somewhere, and it's not like some kind of permanent interior aspect of like who you are. It's
right.
yeah,
Right, and what you said earlier comes back to, it's like you're either convinced of something or you're not, right?
yeah,
That's that's how it works with everything. So that means that everything you're convinced of, right? You're convinced of it, and can you choose to stop being convinced of it right now? No, you can,
it would
right?
be yeah, just any deeply held belief you have, like just try to stop believing it. Just try to assume the world doesn't work that way. And
Right.
I mean, maybe it's a fun like exercise. Maybe you'll learn something from that, but I doubt you'll just drop a belief because you literally just willed yourself to stop. Like there's a
Yeah.
reason that you accept beliefs,
Right.
and
And
it's not just because the homunculus pulled the right lever and told you to
right.
accept it. Like
Right. Yeah, it's just not in there. And that thing is sort of, all of that is intuitive to people. People will walk with you all the way to, with, there's no little guy in your head, with sitting on an armchair, right? And but then they're fine with that. They're fine with that thought experiment. They're fine with going all the way there, but they don't want to think like, okay, but that's not there. Well, what is there? Well, there's just electrochemical impulses. There's just neurons firing, patterns of neurons doing all kinds of things.
Right. There's just kind of this wave of causality we're all riding,
Right,
and we don't
right,
really, none of us have like the kind of responsibility for it that we assume the word responsibility means,
right,
And
right.
I
And
mean, I think there's interesting ways to reframe the concept of responsibility, or we can just
sure,
we can use entirely different language, which
yes,
I tend to think is more useful, is to just like to, to think about like how we're going to affect that process with the tools we have, um,
right,
rather than trying to say like who did that, and it's like
right.
no one did it. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's also like, we talked in the beginning about compatibilism a bit, and it's what for me the interesting thing is that um, like when I talk about free will, I talk about the sort of free will my mom believes in, like the sort of free, and it's not a difficult philosophical construct. There isn't
right,
any, and I would say that most people don't live out their lives thinking about complex philosophical arguments like that. But they do have sort of just an every ordinary day concept of free will, right?
right,
And um, to me, the fact that that thing, what most people feel they have, is not a thing, is to me it is what makes things make sense. And other people would say that nothing would make sense, and like intelligent discussion wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to reason, and or you and I don't have these things connected to the free will concept. I don't think anything becomes less beautiful or useful if you take this out. And I also never really got the arguments that sort of try to explain that this is so. For me, it's like I don't want to just write them all off, but I really find it hard to grasp that what is it that you feel like you lose? Because basically all we're saying is, oh, hey, you're a biological organism. And the atoms that make up your body, they don't have abilities that, no other atoms in the universe have, right? And
right.
that to me, to say I don't have free will doesn't make me a rock, right? It makes me a highly, highly, highly complex biological robot,
Yeah,
but it doesn't turn me into a rock. Like I still have an interesting life. Like there is no, it,
yeah,
it, it hasn't become stale or unadventurous I because I see myself as a biological organism and not as something that has something that it just doesn't have in that ultimate sense,
yeah. I
right?
mean, the if you're like on the other side of this discussion and like things aren't making sense and you're worried about like losing something, the
Right,
thing to remember is that like everything that you value about your subjective experience can be understood the other way as well. Like,
right, right.
we're not suggesting that you give any of that up. We're suggesting that there's a better explanation for why you have those experiences.
Yeah, and
And
I would say that the things that they would call free will, I usually have a word for that. Like there, it's
mhm,
like either you can select causally select options, and it's like there's things like emotional regulation and just things like discipline and things like autonomy, and those things are all very important, and I wouldn't want to throw those out. But I just think we can perfectly talk about those in a way where we don't have to pretend like there's not a lot of determinism going on in our universe, right? And
right.
also that
My
it's
cat's
like
making some noise. Sorry.
no worries. No, but also that like you know most of the times I'm like, yeah, as long as we sort of agree how the world works, right?
Right.
Like we don't think there's any contra-causal powers, and if there's something that makes sense in a naturalistic framework, that you want to call free will, by all means, I would say. I mean, that you could make an argument for. It depends on how you do it, if it's a good or a bad thing. I
Yeah,
mean, if you're honest about that, we don't have the libertarian kind of free will, then I think you're fine to redefine free will and use it in a way where, if you would have to name something from a naturalistic point of view as free will, then yeah, that's where you should put it, like in the mindfulness, self-control, discipline type of area. That's that's where I would put the label.
sure.
I don't feel need for the label. Also, for an example, um, but I do get the concerns, sort of. I do get the concerns, like, oh, maybe if we throw it out, we also throw out a lot of good things, right?
Yeah,
Because because why wouldn't there be an up and a downside to it? I mean, that's also subjective. I mean, some people um, might find pride to be an amazing emotion and feel sad that there's no real justification for their pride, right?
right.
um, but also, for an example, um, um, the guy you talked about, who also had, he sort of had a subtle version of compatibilism also.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Chris.
right. Yeah, a lot of what he says, I very much agree with. Right,
Right.
but I also think that that might have a sort of a subjective component to it when it comes to the novelty. What you mentioned, it's like, I wonder if that's true. I'm open to that being the case. That um, that some novelty perhaps goes lost if we don't have this sort of free agent antagonist protagonist thing, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, though, so I'm open to that. But on the other hand, like, if I watch The Matrix, and if I interpret the Matrix deterministically, it sort of becomes more cool almost. It becomes almost, you
Right.
know, uh, because then you sort of see this puzzle unfold. Sort of, it's like that's also kind of novel, though. Like, that's right. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just it
Yeah,
depends on how you look at it.
I feel like the best move there is to um try to question like what the relationships are of all these concepts,
Right.
and like separate the concept from like the overall sort of like meta construct of free will or no free will or whatever, and like parse out those individual concepts, and then just hone in on those and ask like, what's the value of this? Is this worth keeping? Can you understand it from this framework? Can you understand it from that
Right.
framework? And maybe like in time, the person that is lumping all these things together and saying like it either has to be black or white, you either have to throw it all out or keep it all, like you can show that it's dissectable, you could take those pieces apart, you can keep some of the pieces, like there's no rules that say you can't do that.
Yeah,
um
yeah, and I also think perhaps, though, a part of it is also skepticism, because in the free will debate, what you run into um, is that, hard determinists, hard incompatibilists, and compatibilists, we all agree that libertarian free will is not a thing. That's what
right.
those three groups have in common, at least. The libertarian kind is out of the question for those three views, right? Um,
I feel
but
like that's really significant, that like to me that seems like the portion of the conversation with the biggest consequences.
right, it is,
Yeah.
because the thing is, why I wanted to mention skepticism is because what you notice if you deny this sense of free will is that you're constantly bumping into people's intuitions, and the problem with those is most people are at least um, most people seem to think that everyone has these intuitions, right? So subjectively. So um, yeah, you sort of bump into your, you can approach it from the neuroscience perspective or the physics perspective or the meditation perspective, or it doesn't matter from which angle you get at this, but you're sort of presenting logical arguments, or you're presenting um, evidence from neuroscience, but you keep bumping into, yeah, but it feels as if there's a self in here that has the free will and has the experience.
At some point that has to be questioned. Like you have
Right,
to, there has to be a sense of skepticism about that.
right, and that's the thing, is it's thriving of lots of people having that intuition, because as I said, if only one person would have had that intuition, that would change it. But it's because most people have it, they feel like, yeah, well, we all feel as if we have it, so
Hmm.
that should be good evidence that we have it. But the first of all, we don't all feel like we have it, and second of
Yeah,
all, having an experience is evidence of an experience and not of the thing, even if everyone on earth agrees with you.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
still
We could all be mistaken in our interpretation.
right. We like, yeah, and like I said, with the optic blind spot, it's very possible for the entire population of humans to be mistaken about something that can be very easily and directly um, seen through
Right. And
for what it
yeah,
is.
yeah, not difficult at all. So we have been talking for a long time.
Yes, yes.
I want to go ahead and wrap it up.
Right.
In the hopes that someone will watch the whole video. Because if it goes for too long, no one will watch it.
Right.
There's like diminishing returns the longer we go on. Uh,
Right.
so I don't know. Is there anything that we want to squeeze in here at the end before we take off?
Nah, man, next time we're just gonna go 20 minutes. We're just gonna go bam, 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 bam. We're just gonna, and
I don't
just
think we're capable.
lay down the case.
All right, man.
Let's give it a try.
We'll aim for a 20-minute video. I really do
Yes.
want to. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I really do want to review Greg Caruso's case for the public health quarantine model.
Yeah.
Try to hone in on that to make that more accessible for people. So maybe
Great.
sometime in the near future we can handle that one.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. Well,
Always fun.
yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. For anyone that's still watching, thank you for hanging in here and listening to us babble for I don't even know how long it's been, maybe a couple hours. Roy, thank you so much again for making yourself available. Thank you for understanding that I don't know how daylight savings times works across multiple countries. So I scheduled this an hour off
Well,
of when we meant to
well,
meet.
I
But
I didn't know. I didn't know either. That's why I let you. That's why I made you do it. And then
I was so stunned when I had the wrong time. I was like, I reviewed my logic. I was like, no. I know how this works. It's noon here.
yeah.
Add 7 hours, and then
Right.
add 12 hours to convert it into the 24-hour clock.
Right.
And I didn't account for daylight savings time. So because it hasn't happened here yet. But
Right.
but my understanding is it happened for you today.
That's correct.
So yeah,
Yes.
I don't, man. I'm struggling. This is why
Yeah.
some of us hide in the social sciences. We don't go into math or physics. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Roy. I really am going to end it now. Everybody have a
Right.
nice day.
Bye.